This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Foreign policy issues remain troubling this week. Former Ambassador Mike Ussery, who served in Republican administrations, analyzes the U.S. options in Syria and the rest of the Arab world. Anti-nuclear activist Joe Cirincione says, don't worry about North Korea, its missiles don't even work. And Bill Press interviews Sister Simone Campbell, the leader of Nuns on the Bus, who are mobilizing again, this time in support of immigration reform. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Mike Ussery, a former ambassador, says drawing lines in the sand in Syria or elsewhere is effective only as part of a larger overarching strategy. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Mike Ussery was ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan. He is a veteran of 7 political campaigns, including the 1988 Bush-Quayle campaign and the 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. He also has a successful business career and is a founder of 8 companies and 3 nonprofit organizations focused on overseas work and charities. Mike Ussery, always a pleasure to speak with you on americasdemocrats.org.
Same here, Jim. Great to be back.
Now, from South Korea to Iran to Syria, the Obama administration has been drawing lines in the sand. Was this inevitable given the threats to world peace from those countries, or is it something about President Obama's style of conducting foreign policy?
Well, I think that drawing lines in the sand is a reaction to situations that are thrown on us, and so. But whether we go the route of sanctions in some cases or real lines in the sand, these are more tools. They sound like policies, but I think they only really work well when they're part of overarching strategies. And if they're just totally reactive and we don't have a more grand strategy in each country, then we get in a higher level of risk. So I think the line in the sand in Syria is a case where when the president drew that line, he was believing, or at least hoping, that would be preventing any kind of use of these weapons. And so I don't think we were quite fully prepared, even though there have been, the military has been always looking at options from the military side. I don't think we were quite prepared to see them cross over that line. But what I'd like to see more on Syria as a broader policy. I'm glad that we may be going in with more weapons to the rebels here pretty soon. I hope that's the way it's going to come out. But you don't want the foreign policy to be so just reactive that it's all that you draw a line in the sand, and you also seem to be suggesting that almost anything you do up to crossing that line is okay, because that's not the case either.
Now, of course, I want to point one thing out. I have to apologize to our friends in South Korea, because I said South Korea, and I obviously meant North Korea when I was talking about lines in the sand there. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. The situation in Syria creates a dilemma, doesn't it? I mean, the moral imperative to act against rogue nations and the political consequences of aligning yourself with people who potentially will turn against you.
Well, I mean, it's a cold reality of what's going on, and in fact, we can use as examples the leadership in both Afghanistan and Iraq, countries that we've controlled it for a certain period of time, where I think we erred and we went too much hands off. We were trying to say, okay, we're not imperialists, we're not colonial. Each of these countries can develop democracy in their own way. We'll respect their democratic elections, and then, it was things really broke open, and we've got a guy in Iraq, Maliki, who's, in my opinion, he's a dictator who's been elected, and quite controversial, and just not where we wanted things to be. In terms of Syria and other countries, we weren't betting on Assad. We actually were happy over the last decade to think he was somebody who was going to be a reformer. So the U.S. normalized relations with Syria, and at the time it really was the right thing to do. But it is, it's a real harsh fact of life in international politics and the world today, which is just spinning and turning in so many countries so rapidly, and I'm sure in a few years we'll be talking about countries we don't even speak about today and what will be going on there. And so, we're always trying to act in our own interest with principles, with morals. But, look at Gaddafi. After decades of being in conflict with Gaddafi, all the signs were that he was going to change his stripes a bit, and we stabilized and actually had decent bilateral relations for all of about 4 or 5 years, and then things turned there. So this is a fact of life. Let's go into each one of these with our eyes open, and let's do what is in our best interest. That ends up being the bottom line.
Have we made mistakes, or could we not have seen any of this coming, whether you're talking about Syria or any other country?
Well, that's right. Whether I'm talking about Syria or any other country or any administration, every administration makes mistakes, and every administration will, especially if we're now counting up to almost 200 countries in the world, and things going on in every one of them that we can't manage every situation all the time. Sure, everybody makes mistakes. I think we've got the burden of being the great global power and having the broadest and biggest and deepest global interests of any country in the world, but yet it's all too much to manage. I mean, you look at Iran, for example. Iran every day gets up and thinks about what's happening there, what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Syria. It's a corridor that they live by 24/7. They're out there. They know the local officials in each country. They know the geography. They're paying people off. And for us, even though it's one of the great issues facing us, we're just not able by our nature to focus as much attention and get down as deep into the weeds as they can. So we've got to always realize in some situations, particularly in certain regions, we're going to have disadvantages. And that just means we've got to be more nimble, more flexible, and try to be more broadly engaged at all times, and not just wait for until there are urgent situations.
We're speaking with Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan. Is terrorism on the wane, or is it something that can be defeated, as in President Bush's global war on terrorism?
I think when we look at history, there's always terrorism, and in fact, I'm always surprised. There are acts of terrorism that go on in the world every day that we don't hear about. Several years ago, not far long ago, it might have been in Sri Lanka, and maybe it would make the U.S. media, maybe it wouldn't. But it's a constant in this world. Now, in the 1980s, I remember there were multiple bombings in Paris done by Lebanese terrorists. Well, that was from security measures, from international politics. The situation changed. That went away. There was the waves of Palestinian terror. So you can talk about what we can do and where we might win out or change the situation with certain terrorist groups. But I think is what we saw in Boston. There's always somebody new ready to hurt us if they can, and our allies.
2 years after the Arab Spring, where do things stand in Egypt and in Libya?
Well, how about badly? That's we again. You talk about who we work with, who we think's going to be a good leader, who we can work with, and you've got the situation in Egypt where we couldn't have imagined that somebody who's in a group that had been the Muslim Brotherhood, that they had been saying they were oppressed for so long, been left out of politics. We would have thought that somebody who felt they suffered like that would go in and be more open arms, and not again what I think we see too often in the Arab world is democracy as a means to try to grab and execute total power. And so we've got our hands full in Egypt. We've got we've got leverage in Egypt, but it's really dicey about what to do and when. On Libya, though, I think we are if we step back, and we have stepped back on Libya, we're seeing the consequences of 40 years of Gaddafi and people who are coming to power, as we saw in Iraq 10 years ago, who really don't know how to govern, and they come from a tribal society that has always tried to sit down and argue out things tribe by tribe, and that makes for an incredibly slow and ineffective process. And that's what we've got in Libya. Libya's got its access to billions of dollars, but yet a week ago, hundreds of fighters rebel fighters surrounded the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, heavily armed, and they were simply demanding to be paid and to get work in the security business over there. I mean, this is going on all across Libya. You've got new councils, you've got new ministers, you've got a constitution being prepared, and yet the real day-to-day act of governing is failing. I think we have to try to offer more help. I think we have to offer more help on trying to control weapons. Yes, a lot of weapons have already gotten out of Libya, but still there's more to do on what they call DDR programs in terms of just security. Maybe security first should be our policy in terms of Libya, and we shouldn't be stepping back so far from it and saying, okay, you're on your own now, good luck. That doesn't work. In fact, it didn't work in 20-something years ago in East Europe, where we just said, this is great, congratulations, good luck, and some would argue in 20 years later, some of those countries have still never had a good government.
We're speaking with Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan, of course, veteran of 7 political campaigns, including the 1988 Bush-Quayle campaign and 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. And as I've just stated, you have a background in Republican politics, and we're okay with that, Mike. Who do you see as the leading Republican lights in foreign policy now that Dick Lugar's out of the picture?
Well, it's very clear just from watching the airwaves and hearing the ideas coming out that John McCain is probably the de facto leader of foreign policy in the Republican Party, and keep in mind that he's one of the founding lights of the International Republican Institute, which like the National Democrat Institute, is trying to promote democracy around the world. I'd say McCain and Lindsey Graham. Now, I don't, of course, with Senator McCain, you've got a lot of people who are just instantly going to be negative about anything possibly being proposed by the senator. And I don't know down the road what his plans are longer term than this. But I'd say Lindsey Graham really is day in, day out, is a voice of both reason and strategy. You can disagree with his reason, but he's always got a strategic view. He's always thinking ahead in foreign policy. I think if he became a little less political sounding and sometimes a little less acerbic, he could become quite a Senate statesman in foreign policy. Now, and then one other name to mention, though, is Marco Rubio. Rubio is on the Foreign Relations Committee. We all know he's an up-and-coming rising star in the GOP. And in addition to immigration, keep in mind he's the ranking subcommittee member for East Asia. So he's really one of the senators most focused on China. We don't hear as much about that, but they're really I think most of the leadership in the Republican Party is coming out of the Senate side, though you've got specialists on the House side, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, Congressman Joe Wilson, some others who've got regions of the world that they're doing great yeoman work on. But Lindsey Graham, to me, is the voice, is the heart and soul and the voice of Republican foreign policy these days.
All right. Now, generally speaking, where do you think your party is headed? Do they have a chance to win the White House in 2016? And who would you like to see try it? Or even
Wouldn't you rather we talk about Somalia or Sudan or something? Let's get back to something easier. I have to say that I can sit here today and not. I can tell your audience there's no great optimistic feeling about where things go in 2016. And when I was younger and working on the front line of campaigns, we used to say in the Republican Party that, frankly, back in the old days, we'd won several elections because of who the Democrats put up, and then I'm thinking back to, say, Mondale in '84 and something like that. That was the flaw, and that we really were dependent on the Democrats defeating themselves. And that may be, the lay of the land for 2016. Of course, anything can happen in 2016. Who knows where the public will be after 8 years of one president. You mentioned that I was working in the Bush-Quayle campaign. I mean, of course, one of the big challenges for now former President Bush was the fact he'd been vice president for 8 years for Reagan, and the question was, will the public give the Republicans 4 more years? That'll still come up in 2016, and the other way I just look at the election is still, as this was so soundly proven just half a year ago, it is an electoral election. And as long as the Republicans are locked out of that Northeast corridor and California, and locked out, really, of the Midwest, including Ohio, and then have the ability to lose and keep losing Florida and Virginia, then there's no prospect. But in the end, we know it's 3 years is a long way away, and it's going to get down to what personalities. And frankly, to me, the only clear, strong person on the 2016 side that I'd be willing to bet on is a guy who's got that Bush name, and that's his biggest negative.
Mm. The former governor of Florida, I'm assuming?
Yeah, the former governor of Florida, who's just a wonderful individual and just a great. He's a real leader, but I'm not the first person to say, can there be 3 Bushes and 40-something presidents? So anyway, and we don't know that he's going to run, but let's sit back and see. We could go down the field of candidates, and at the end of the day, you're just going to get me more depressed. So let's leave it there.
I don't want to do that, and we'll save that conversation for another day. Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan. Mike, as always, thank you so much for your time with us today on AmericasDemocrats.org. Look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Jim. Take care.
You as well. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going, and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Should we be worried about those missiles North Korea keeps moving around? An expert on nuclear weapons says no, the missiles won't work. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
I think of a social welfare charity being like the Little Sisters of the Poor, not the Little Koch brothers of the plutocracy. Yet, the brothers have created their very own social welfare charity, which they used as a political front group for funneling $39 million into campaigns against Democrats last year. Interesting, since under IRS rules, 501c4 charities are supposed to do philanthropic work for the welfare of all, not political hatchet jobs for billionaires. In fact, the law bans these tax-exempt entities from spending more than 49% of their funding on political efforts to promote their issues. Yet, hundreds of these C4s, mostly right-wing, are flagrantly violating the tax law by operating primarily as political fronts for funneling secret corporate donations into raw partisan campaigns. How did they get their privileged status as charities? by outright lying to the IRS, then defying the agency to stop them as they dump millions of corrupt dollars into our elections. For example, American Action Network, a C4 created by Wall Street lobbyists, has spent two-thirds of its revenue on elections, including putting up $745,000 from secret donors to elect Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. How ironic, then, that Johnson is now one of the Tea Party mad dogs howling at IRS officials. It's scandalous, Johnson shrieks, that some Tea Party groups have not been given C4 status because IRS agents have had the temerity to question whether the groups actually are charitable enterprises or just rank political outfits fraudulently posing as charities. This is Jim Hightower saying Tea Party groups should not be singled out for IRS scrutiny, but neither should they be allowed to cheat by shamefully masquerading as little sisters of the poor.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Joe Cirincione is head of the Ploughshares Fund, an organization dedicated to ridding the world of nuclear weapons. He's optimistic in the long run, but in the short run, he's disappointed in the president's response to a possible threat from North Korea. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Joe Cirincione is president of Ploughshares Fund, a global security foundation. He is the author of Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons and Deadly Arsenals, and is a member of Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Joe Cirincione, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now, as an expert on nuclear weapons and an advocate for nonproliferation, are you pessimistic now that Iran and North Korea are apparently nuclear powers with an attitude?
Well, North Korea has nuclear weapons. They've tested 3 times, and the last one seems to have been successful. Iran is trying to get that capability, but they're still years away. It is a problem. It is a challenge to us. But here's the good news. We always talk about states like Iran and North Korea, but there are no states like Iran and North Korea. There's only Iran and North Korea. There's no other states racing to get nuclear weapons capability. If we can turn back these programs, if we can reverse this course, stymie North Iran in place, isolate North Korea, walk back that program, we can start looking at the end of proliferation, at the end of this spread of nuclear weapons that began 67, 68 years ago. There used to be dozens of countries with nuclear programs. We're now down to a handful. So I see the optimistic scenario here beyond the current threats.
Okay. Now, after North Korea started making noises about attacking U.S. assets, President Obama said we would deploy 14 more anti-missile interceptors in Alaska at a cost of about $1 billion. Is that a big disappointment for the anti-nuclear movement?
It was a move that worked very well politically and diplomatically. It shored up our allies. It sent a message to China, put a real line in the sand for North Korea. The only problem is these anti-missile interceptors don't work. This is a deeply troubled program. There's a reason we'd stopped them at 30. They tested miserably. There hasn't been a successful test for any of these interceptors since 2010. And even then, they failed half of the tests that they had taken up to that point. So this is really sort of a symbolic move, a very expensive symbolic move. It's a little disappointing to see the Obama administration acting as if these things actually work. They know better.
Now, so they don't work, and you're not
alone.
Don't work. You're not alone in making that point. As non-technically as you can, why don't they work?
There's 2 basic reasons. One is there's real production problems with these things. In 2 of the recent tests, they didn't even get out of the tubes. And you have to understand, this was a very sloppily done program where they called it spiral development. They were going to test a little, deploy a little, test a little. The Bush administration wanted to sort of lock in missile defenses. They wanted to get them on the ground as quickly as possible, hoping that a president couldn't back out of them. In some ways that succeeded, but in the process they produced a very sloppy product. There's major manufacturing problems with these missiles. You would not buy one of these missiles. It was up to you. You wouldn't accept a car that was produced like this thing was, but we're buying it as an anti-missile. But there's a more fundamental problem. It's the whole design of a ground-based interceptor system. A ballistic missile follows what they call a ballistic trajectory. After a brief period of powered flight, it sort of glides, coasts through outer space for an extended period before re-entering in the last few minutes to reach its target. Missile interceptors like the systems in Alaska try to intercept the missile while it's in outer space. That's where they try to hit it. And remarkably, if the conditions are ideal, we can actually hit a bullet with the bullet. And we've done that in tests. The problem is in real world, that bullet is not cooperating. It doesn't have a transponder on it like we use in the test, a little beacon that says, here I am, hit me. These warheads will be accompanied by decoys, little aluminum balloons like you have at a birthday party, or little pieces of wire the size of a paper clip that will jam the radar, produce a cloud around what's supposed to be a bright target spot, or jammers, little 1 watt or 5 watt jammers that will jam the radars. So the interceptor can't see the target in outer space. That's the main flaw with all these ground-based missile scepters. We can hit a bullet with the bullet, but you got to be able to see it. To get around that problem, we don't test with decoys. Every test we do is carefully scripted so that it's only the warhead that's up there. There's no decoys in there. Until you can have a realistic test, the American public can't have any confidence that any of these ground-based interceptors are ever going to work.
We're speaking with Joe Cirincione, president of Ploughshares Fund, Global Security Foundation. He's also the author of Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons and Deadly Arsenals. All right, so the interceptors don't work as advertised. President Obama is still saying all the right things about nonproliferation, but he's still in favor of continuing to use them. I guess perhaps trying to deflect the criticism of the right that Democrats are too soft on defense, but wouldn't there be other ways to do that, since obviously there are plenty of people that know these things don't work?
Yeah. It's disappointing to see the president sort of rely on this prop of missile defense. You would hope he could move beyond it by now. And the only way to do that is to really present the American people with a comprehensive approach. A president hasn't sat down and talked to the American people about the nuclear threat in a very long time. It's about time the president did. What are we looking at? How many nuclear weapons do we actually need? It's hard to imagine a military mission for even one nuclear weapon. But suppose you said, well, we got to have at least maybe 10. Use of 10 nuclear weapons would be a catastrophe unprecedented in modern history. But you might even decide you need a reserve of them. You need 500 nuclear weapons just in case. We have 5,000 right now. What are we doing with 5,000 hydrogen bombs? And they're extremely expensive. They cost over $50 billion a year for nuclear weapons and related programs every year, year after year. The president needs to talk honestly with the American public about the real threats that are out there, the scale of those threats, and how the only way to solve these threats is to move step by step to get rid of these weapons. As long as they exist, this is the one weapon that threatens us as a nation. It's the only weapon that can destroy us as a nation. We'll be much safer off in a world with fewer weapons and eventually no weapons. We're the major superpower in the world. It's time for us to act like it, to lock in our military advantage for as long as we can. And the way to do that is to get moving to eliminate those nuclear weapons. That's what I hope the president will tell us in the months ahead.
Now, we don't hear much anymore about nuclear policy issues between the U.S. and Russia. Is it all in the past, or are there still some irritants there?
There are major irritants. I mean, there's clearly, domestic policy that Putin is tightening his grip on power, President Putin, the president of Russia. And they had cooperated with us in the past on reducing nuclear weapons. U.S. and Russian arsenals have come down dramatically. They're now about a quarter of what they were during the height of the Cold War, and we have a very good inspection regime where we know what they're doing and they know what we're doing. But Russia is still clinging to these Cold War weapons. They see them as their last, vestige of superpower status. It's the only issue where they deal with us on a sort of an equal level. And they are started, because they're conventionally inferior now, their army's deteriorating, they have major demographic problems in their country, shrinking population, a troubled economy. They still see these nuclear weapons as maybe being able to compensate militarily for some of what they see as the threats to their country. So they've been dragging their heels. And they've been concerned about the U.S. deployment of missile defenses in Europe, thinking that's aimed at them, not Iran. But there may be some breakthroughs coming. I'm actually been meeting with Russians in side conversations about this, and there may be a softening on the Russian position. We may be able to make more reductions with them than the few hundred we made with the New START treaty. We'll know more this year.
You mentioned Iran, and I'm thinking about Russia, China, folks that we have, let's say, cool relationships with. Where are they in all of these talks with Iran and North Korea and the whole thing? Why haven't we heard from them, and why aren't we using them to say, hey, look, you got to calm these guys down?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, they tend to see the problem differently than we do. Russia and China see Iran differently. We think of it as an urgent threat that must be countered. They think of it as a problem that has to be managed. They have business relationships with Iran. China buys oil. Russia sells military equipment, or used to. And here's the good news. They have been cooperating with us, particularly since President Obama offered to reach out to Iran, offered to negotiate with them, wanted to make a deal at the beginning of his term and was rejected. That really helped show people where the real problem was. And after the president exposed the secret centrifuge facility that Iran was building at Fordow, near the holy city of Qom, that really ticked off the Russians and the Chinese, and they started to cooperate a lot more with us. They've signed on to the UN Security Council resolutions. They're participating in the sanctions. Russia is not selling military equipment to Iran. They lost $1 billion in one particular sale that was almost ready to go through. So they've made real sacrifices here, but they're not, they don't see it the same way as we do. On North Korea, China doesn't mind having North Korea being like a thorn in the side for the U.S. or a counter to South Korea or Japanese influence, but they don't want it to get out of control. China doesn't want a war on the Korean Peninsula. They don't want instability on their borders. They want 10, 20 years of international peace so they can undertake their economic development. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel was talking about this on his April 3rd speech about the mutual interest we have with China, and was reaching out to the Chinese to try to get them to cooperate to contain North Korea and start de-escalating this crisis. So there are areas we can cooperate. It takes some skilled diplomats and statesmen on our side to do it. Fortunately, we have a very good national security team at this point. We'll see if they can't make some progress on this in the months ahead. Okay, now before we let you go, two-part question. Overall, are you optimistic about whether we can stop the spread of nuclear weapons and prevent their use? And also, is the equation changed by the prospect of dirty bombs in the hands of terrorists? Yeah. Dirty bombs are a problem. That's not a nuclear explosive device. It's a conventional explosive, say a satchel of dynamite with some radioactive material like cesium mixed into it that would radiate 10 square blocks of an urban center, for example. That is a real problem. I'm frankly surprised we haven't seen that happen already. That's terrible, but the death toll will be relatively light. It's more of a economic disaster, as you can't use that radioactive area until you've cleaned it up. That could take years. I am very optimistic about getting rid of these 20th century weapons, nuclear weapons. There are fewer weapons in the world now than there were during the Cold War. There are fewer countries with these weapons. More countries have given them up over the last 25 years than have tried to get them. The tide is clearly towards fewer and fewer weapons. U.S. and Russian arsenals are clearly going to continue to come down, and the question is, what's the slope of that decline? How fast can we get them down before something terrible happens? There's a growing bipartisan consensus among the U.S. security establishment that whatever benefits nuclear weapons may have had during the Cold War, those are now outweighed by the risks they represent to our troops, to our countries, to our allies. That's why you see the president speaking the way he does. It's not some idealist notion. It's the new center of American realism. Fewer nuclear weapons make us safer. No nuclear weapons would make us safest at all. And when people like George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and Bill Perry and Sam Nunn are saying that, and Colin Powell and Jim Baker and others, these are the rock-solid center of the American security establishment. You know the president's on firm ground. I hope he can convince his staff to follow his lead and help him implement this world of peace and security without nuclear weapons.
Okay. Joe Cirincione, president of Ploughshares Fund, the Global Security Foundation, also the author of Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons and Deadly Arsenals. Joe, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me on.
We enjoyed your time. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Sister Simone Campbell, the leader of Nuns on the Bus.
They are back on the road. You remember Nuns on the Bus, who first appeared and made headlines when they were out going to many parts of this country, protesting the Ryan budget, which would have cut every program helping the poor. Nuns on the Bus are back on the road to build up support for comprehensive immigration reform, leading the good sisters. Sister Simone Campbell is the executive director of Network, a good friend of the program. She joins us from the bus somewhere in New Jersey. Good morning, sister. How are you?
Good morning, Bill. I'm great. How about yourself?
You guys are already on the road this morning?
Oh, yes. We had an early morning. We met for prayer at 6:30 this morning and hit the road at 7:15 sharp. So, yep, we've already been doing a lot of work getting ready. But it's an exciting trip.
It is an exciting trip. I know you kicked off this latest mission yesterday at Liberty State Park in New Jersey, across from Ellis Island. Where are you headed, and how far are you going on this trip, sister?
It's a huge trip. It's more than double what we did last summer.
Whoa!
As you said, we started in Ellis Island, and we end up in San Francisco looking out at Angel Island, which is Ellis Island West. But it's 6,500 miles, 15 states, 54 events in 3 weeks. It's an amazing big journey.
Oh, wow. Just think of the logistics and the planning that goes into something like that. Good for you. I love it.
Well,
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's an amazing planning thing. But, you know, what we're finding every place is people volunteer to take the point. So, like, we just left Lawrenceville, the Catholic Church there, and it was so wonderful because one of their people took the point, and the pastor was out to see us off this morning. The bishop came out last night. They had a huge spread of a reception that the parish put together. I mean, this is just everybody coming together. It takes several villages, or I'm beginning to call it a metropolis, to put on a bus trip. So it's amazing. Ellis
Island to Angel Island, I love the symmetry of that. Why the issue of immigration reform? Why is this so important, do you think, to people of faith, sister?
Oh, well, what we know as Catholic sisters is all of our communities were immigrant communities at some point. They came to serve the immigrants. So it's at the core of who we are as Catholic sisters, but it's at the core of who we are as American people. The United States, the best of our story, the creativity of our story is all about immigration. And so we know that it's the glory of our past, but we totally are convinced that it is the promise of our future. It is an amazing opportunity for us, but politically, we have a very short window to get this done. We only have like 2 months because of the congressional cycle, so we've got to put pressure on now. It's got to happen.
And what are you asking people to do as you move across the country?
Oh, Gloria, it's great. We've got this thing about raise your hands, raise your voice. And so I get everybody in the crowd to raise their hands, and then we have people sign cards so that we can deliver them to their senators and members of Congress to let them know that they are for comprehensive, common-sense immigration reform. We have this other thing that's if folks text 877-877 and put in the word nuns in the message, they'll get a call back from me that encourages them to talk to their senators, and then we'll put them through to their senator's office. They enter their zip code so we can tell who their senator is, and then we'll put them through to the senator's office. And we're asking people to say their name, their constituents. They're for comprehensive immigration reform because it's part of their faith. Wow. It's really exciting. It's fun.
Yeah, no, that's a great message. How do people hook up with that again?
Okay, it's really easy. They just have to text to the number 877-877, and then they put in the message nuns, and it hooks you up. Or if you're Spanish-speaking, you can put in hermanas, and you can hear me in Espanol también.
Muy bien, muy bien. Hermana, sisters, hermana Simone Campbell. That's right. So I just have to understand, it's 877 once or 877? 877. No. Just that number, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just repeat it twice. You just do it twice.
And then do it twice. 877 and then 877.
877.
That's what I wanted to ask,
Put in nuns.
All right, great. We got it, nuns, and you get to hear Sister Simone Campbell tell you. I love that, how to get in touch with you. You connect them right to their own senator, right to their own member of Congress.
Exactly. We'll put them right through so that they can right then let their voice be heard. Because what we're hearing is that people who are fearful, terrified of immigration reform are calling a lot. So what we need to do is we need to let people know that faith tells us to step back from fear. We're not to be afraid, and to welcome in the folks that make us who we are. So this is our effort to lift the voice. In fact, this morning at prayer, I was reading, we read a little scripture, and it was Jesus coming to the apostles across the water, and his first words to them is, "It's me. Don't be afraid." And isn't that what everybody tells us? Oh, it's just me. Don't be afraid.
Sister, how many, I have to ask you, so how many of you are on the bus? Is it one bus or more than one bus? And how many sisters are on this trip, or do you just pick up different sisters as you go along? What is it? How's it work?
Hitchhiking sisters, that's what we do. We pick them up. Now, actually, right now we have 7 sisters on the bus right now that started with us. Actually, it's a blessing in New Haven, and then we went over to New Jersey. And 2 are leaving in D.C. We're picking 2 more up in D.C. The max we can hold are 8, and then plus we have a couple of staff. Some of my staff from the office came up to ride the bus today to get the experience. So we're a little crowded today, wall-to-wall folks, but it's great.
Right. We're talking with Sister Simone Campbell. She's the executive director of Network and the leader of the Nuns on the Bus on this latest mission on behalf of immigration reform. And, of course, that's Network Lobby, networklobby.org. Now, Sister, I have to ask you, we've talked before about the fact that the Vatican was sort of on the warpath against American nuns, thinking you're spending too much time talking about issues like poverty and like immigration and not talking enough about same-sex marriage or abortion. And I was counting on this new pope to kind of put that aside and say, no, let's let the nuns do their good work and just get off their backs. But I read somewhere that with this pope's blessing, the Vatican is still pursuing this little investigation of American nuns. How's that going? What's going on?
Well, it does appear from the press reports that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith says that the Pope said. So it's sort of a little, down the chain to continue the censure. It appears that the Pope is, as you would expect, is really focused on the initial high-level changes that he sees as necessary for our church, which is quite exciting, actually. And I have a hunch that the issues of Catholic sisters in the United States are kind of further down on his priority list. He's worried about reorganizing the whole global church. So I have a hunch. I say we're sort of like the soccer ball in the power politics of the Vatican, kind of being, we're not at the table. We're not engaged in the actual power conversation. But you know what, Bill? The thing I've realized is that this is all being used to the good. I mean, the fact that this notoriety is creating a great opportunity for us to show what we do as Catholic sisters.
Yeah.
We were just sort of chuckling this morning. Who would ever think that we Catholic sisters could draw this kind of attention to key issues in our society? So we know that, from my perspective, the Holy Spirit uses everything to the good. So it's painful, it's sad, and I have to tell you, the Bishop O'Connell came last night and he was taking pictures of me while I was talking, and he spoke. It was just wonderful, but it brought tears to my eyes, so that he was there. And so while
great.
I can say the Holy Spirit's alive and well and making mischief and doing good stuff, it's still painful. So to have Bishop O'Connell come and be a part of it, it was hugely healing for me.
No,
so
I think it's extremely significant, as with your last trip, that so many bishops have come out to join you and to and to echo your message. And it started there, and I'm sure you're going to see a lot more of that with high-ranking members of the clergy all the way across the country. And I look forward to the day, Sister, when Pope Francis says, you know what, if you really want to know what the Catholic Church should be all about, just look at what the nuns on the bus are doing in the United States of America, and that's the example. That's the example that we ought to set. That day's going to come, and when I meet him, I'm going to tell him that's what he ought to say. So I have to ask you finally, Sister. As a Catholic, we never went anywhere, my family, without having the St. Christopher medal up front. So I hope you've got one on the bus somewhere for safe travels.
Absolutely, we do. And friends in Oakland, California, where I was this past weekend, gave me not only the St. Christopher medal, but gave me the medal as a joke, a reliquary of St. Christopher, and in it is a piece of tire from St. Christopher's bus, because it is understood that he liked traveling by bus, and the medal that St. Christopher wears, because you think, okay, we wear a St. Christopher medal. Well, what medal does St. Christopher wear? Well, they gave me this medal that says Nuns on the bus. It's just too dear.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Hey, so how do people find out your itinerary so they can meet up with you as you're coming across the country? They go
Fabulous.
They
go nunsonthebus.org, and we have our whole itinerary up there.
Okay.
You can see the map and click on any of the dates, the little circles, and all of our dates come up. You can RSVP, ask for updates, check us out. We've got blogs. Oh, and I'm trying to raise my Twitter followers so everybody can follow me on Twitter.
On Twitter at Sister underscore
SR. It's SR_Simone.
At SR_Simone. Okay, great. And so check out nunsonthebus.org. The Nuns on the Bus, they are heading to a church, parish hall, or whatever near you. Go out and say hello. And Sister Simone Campbell, we'll catch up with you next time we can in studio.
Okay, look forward to it, Bill.
All right, safe travels. Great. Oh, man, I got to tell you, I love what those nuns on the bus are doing. I think it's just so exciting. They are revolutionizing the Catholic Church, and the sisters are leading the way.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Mike Ussery, Joe Cirincione, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to